Okay, so I've got some molybdenum paste and I want to apply it to this shaft. This shaft is what the shutter release runs on. Just make sure, just put a little tiny smear on there, it doesn't need much. A spring goes over that shaft. Let's take our bellows, struts mechanism rather. Again I want some of the molybdenum paste, just running a bit in there through the spring so that this component will run up and down smoothly. It needs very little of this. Molybdenum paste is very good for that sort of thing. And because you're not splashing it on large quantities, it won't be gathering up much grease and dirt. And where we do want some grease is here in the bellows, the struts mechanism for the bellows struts. Now that track at the back, that certainly needs a little bit of grease so that it opens and shuts smoothly. Just making sure I've got covered all of that. That's it. I typically don't do the front until I'm further down the track. It only gets rubbed off on your fingers as you handle it. So to get this back in place, right, first we want our transfer shaft. I'm going to apply a little bit of grease to that. Now this it almost fits underneath the corner of the bellows down in there, so you have to sort of tilt it in to get it into place. That's in place. Now that's held in position and stopped from drifting with this bracket. That bracket has to go down into position. You can probably see it down there in position. Now, I normally open this up all the way so it's fully open. This is the orientation it goes in. So it goes over the shaft, and then you have to get this down into position. You need to squeeze it slightly to get it over that bracket that we've just put in at the top there. Now holding that with my thumb so it doesn't get away. I make sure that the bracket is lined up through its hole there, and we choose the correct screw. So I'm looking at the state of these screws. The two best ones need to be in the back of the camera. They're the ones that the owner will see. That'll do. The next best one needs to go at the top of the camera, and the ugliest screw of them all, and none of these are particularly ugly, goes at the bottom underneath the leather. That one's definitely been painted with matte black. That's definitely matte black. That's definitely not. That's it. So I get that screw run in. I don't do it up tight. I just want it to fit in there, and that stops that bracket getting away that holds the transfer shaft in there. This little spacer has to go into the bottom of the camera in the same position, and that's a bit of an act. I don't know whether you can see it. Basically in this space here, I drop it down there, sliding it on the base of the camera until it's up against the bracket at the back. Then I lift the bracket with my tweezers, and the spacer should drop into place roughly, and then we can align it. So I think it's in position. I'm just checking through. I can just see the edge of it in the hole there, so it's not quite in position, so I just need to move that across. There it is. It's just coming into line now. There it is. So that's lined up with the screw hole. So the screw passes through the body, through that spacer, and into the struts. So I'll run that screw in. Again, I don't tighten it all the way. I just need it to be there and no more. And in the body itself, we've got 2 screws here. Those ones. So I'm just checking that they're aligned. And I'll run those in. And until that screwdriver is magnetised, that's interesting. I thought I'd demagnetised all of these. Never mind, I'll do that again. Since it is magnetised, I'll make use of that feature. Right, so all 4 screws have been run in. They're all in position. There's nothing to go anywhere. Tighten them up. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that part's done. This shaft has to come up through that hole in the front of the struts there. So if struts do not want to collapse when you want to collapse them, and you haven't yet got the guide in place on there, most likely that's just simply trapped underneath the front plate. Right, that's all in place. We can put in that focus assembly mount. Four screws for this. Let's get them out. That's one of them. That's another. That's the third. Oh, didn't need to do that. Where did it go now? And I can't see number 4. There's number 4. There we have it. So I've just got my finger through here holding this up to the front, holding that up in position while I get the screws in. As before, get all the screws started, and tightening up comes last of all. Don't go mad doing those screws up. They will actually distort and effectively the heads squeeze in because they're going into such a countersink. But that looks good. That's all good. You need to attach the bellows to the back of the front standard. That's with 4 screws from the front. So we'll find those, and I did find my 4th screw. It was sitting there waiting for me to spot it on the mat. 4 screws and a suitable screwdriver. I'll close that front down so that it's pressing up against the bellows. Right, they're all in place, and I can just nip those screws up. And now the bellows are firmly fixed. And we just need to reassemble the rest of the focus assembly. So here we have what we need. The inner helical. Now the piece that faces the shutter is the flush face at the front. That's the flush face. This piece here with the recess, that's at the back. So we'll start the helical, inner helical and the outer helical. Just rolling that back to pick up the start of the thread, that's it. And I'm checking to see where I am relative to my markings that I made. Two markings on the inner here and a single one there. There's a single mark that I made and a double mark there, so I am well out. So I'll turn that around a long way and we'll see how close we get. No, I still need to be more, about 2 clicks I think. Oh, overshot there. That looks like me. So what I'm doing here is I'm making sure that the front surface are level and that my marks are aligned, a single line and a single line, a double line and a double line. So I know that that's where it was. That's in the correct position, so my inner and outer helical are correctly positioned relative to each other. Now I'm just going to put a little dab of lighter fluid on here and work those 2 rings together. Now why I do that is that even after you've removed all the dirt and grease, there still might be minor imperfections in there, and doing this effectively rubs them away. And you wouldn't want to do it dry, you'd end up with the particles binding things up, but this just, the brass just rubs the brass high spots over until it's all nice and smooth. That's all good. And I'm just checking here. This surface in particular on this ring often has little bits of deposits of dried grease on it. And that did there, and that does there. And I'm just wiping that off. I'll just provide a bit of unwanted friction otherwise. So that's good. That's all working well. This is the retaining plate, and that's nothing very exciting with the retaining plate. As long as it's clean, it's good. So lubricant. I use this stuff which is called Helimax XP optical and instrument helicoid grease with lithium and PTFE, and you can get that on the internet. A jar like that goes an awful long way. Right, so I back out the inner helical from the outer most of the way and apply a little bit of grease, not much, at about 5 or 6 locations around the circumference. You don't need to pack the threads with grease. In fact, that's counterproductive. Just roll that in, work that backwards and forwards. That's nice and smooth. Just going to add a little bit to make sure I get good coverage to the front of the threads. Again, I'm following much the same procedure, just a little wipe of grease, not as much as that. And again in about 5 positions around the helical. That's nice and smooth. It's not as stiff as it was when the camera arrived by any means. With a rangefinder camera, you need that helical to be not loose, but you need to be able to move it smoothly with one finger while you hold the camera to your eye and are aligning the rangefinder images. With a viewfinder camera, you can hold the camera, you can use your fingers, get a very good grip on the focus mount in order to change the focus. It doesn't need to be as smooth and easy to move for a viewfinder camera as it does for a rangefinder camera. Rangefinder cameras, the focusing is done while you hold the camera to your eye, and with a viewfinder camera it is not. You look down to see what you're doing with the focus alignment. So I've put a little bit of grease around the outside there, and I've put a little bit on the 2 spots where it runs on these guide pins here. Now, putting this in the mount the correct way around, and in my case it's with the double mark to the bottom and the single mark to the top. You can use your own preference there, your own standard way of doing things. Now I'm just checking that that rolls backwards and forwards smoothly in the mount, and it does. If it was reluctant, it would mean that there's probably some alignment problem with those guides, and I'd have to investigate further. And fortunately I don't. So, some of our helicoid grease, I just need to run it down this inside edge here where the retaining plate holds everything into place on that mount. And drop that into place. And then there are 6 screws for this. Now the 6 screws are the same as the 4 screws that held the focus scale ring to the front of the camera. If the camera has been abused over time by various people repairing it, almost inevitably some of the screw heads will be damaged. You'll be wanting your 4 best screws on the scale ring, because that's where they'll be doing their most important work. This camera is in quite good condition. There's certainly no problem like that. And I can put these screws pretty much anywhere I like. I'll just swap for another screwdriver there. So I get all 6 screws in place. I'll check that the motion is still there and smooth, and then nip those screws up. That's good. The focus scale ring. There are two little arms here and here. Now they're part of the lock which stops you from being able to press the buttons to fold the front of the camera if the lens has not been set back to infinity. So they tend to get trapped under here. They need to be floating free. Right, so now I just have to align my marks here and here and here to make sure that I have my focus scale ring in the correct place on that outer helical. As before, I'll get my screws in. I won't do them up tight. I'll get them in place. Sometimes the position might drift while you're trying to do up one of the screws, so check. Remember to go back and check and make sure your alignment marks are still pointing where you expected them to be, and make any adjustment you need to. Set my last one there. Just do those up. Now I'm not doing them up tightly at all, I'm just nipping those up lightly, because if you screw them up tight, what happens is it distorts the inner helical and makes the focus bind up, so it becomes unusually stiff. So don't do those screws up too tight. You don't need to have them done up very tight. Here we go. So a rangefinder coupling ring can go in place next. It just drops into place. We've got two screws. They're smaller screws than the ones we've just used. Yes, that didn't hold to the screwdriver very well. I'd forgotten I'd demagnetised that one. Sometimes it's handy for your screwdrivers to be magnetised and will hold the screws for you. Other times it's very frustrating, because as you try and get some screw into position, it's busy attracting a washer or a spring or some other component that you're trying to fix in place and pulling everything out of the line. It doesn't want to start. Why not? That's better. Both screws are in place, so I can lock those up. And we want our post screw that moves the arm on the rangefinder. Now that often, well, it runs in a bit of grease there, and so often collects a bit of dust and dirt, so I'm just making sure that that's clean to start off with and no crusty lumps on it. So here's our arm for that, and you can probably see the arm there and the hole in the arm that the screw goes into. checking that the focus action is smooth. You'll see that pin moving in and out in its slot. And if we close up the front of the camera, let's get that down to infinity. Press my buttons in. That shaft, of course, that I'd mentioned is just fallen out of line with the hole, so we're not folding the front of the camera up properly. Right. Here, as the front of the camera closes, you'll see that that arm travels right down that track out of the way. And that's what happens when you fold the front of the camera. So, what have we got next? Right. Well, this shaft, of course, must couple to the front shutter at the front of the camera. And in order to do so, it's got to have an end on it with a gear. And this is the end. And that's the bracket it runs through. And there is the cover that covers it. So I'm going to clean that cover first because we haven't done that yet. This couldn't go through the cleaner because we don't want to lose the nicely painted M and X flash sync marks on it. Alright, so a little bit of grease to the inside of this section, a little bit to the outside, and I'm going to put just a smear on that front surface. So our guide goes on, the gear slides on over the top, and then the cover. So I'll pull down that, let's pull this out, open the front of the camera up. That's better. I'm going to pull down the shutter release out of the way so I can get to this easily. Drop the cover over the top. And get the screws in place. There were 2 chrome screws for that. And if you've made a mess of one, make sure that the prettiest one goes here where it'll be seen. Pull that shutter release down out of the way to give myself access to that second screw. Run that down. Now I need to check the action of the focus. My battery's starting to go flat again. I'm going to have to stop here and pick up again, I think. Yeah, I'm just checking the action of the focus and that's all good. Nothing's scraping. And I can nip those 2 screws up. And that'll do for the moment. I'm going to change the battery.